before the first emperor, before the first shrine, before Japan itself had a name. There was only darkness, an ocean of formless chaos, drifting in silence, and then something stirred. A presence with no shape, no gender, no beginning. The ancient chronicles of Japan say that from this void, the gods emerged, one by one, generation after generation, until two of them stood on the floating bridge of heaven, dipped a jeweled spear into the sea below, and pulled an entire nation out of the water. This is the story of the Kami, the sun goddess whose bloodline still sits on a throne today, the storm god who slaughtered an 8-headed serpent, the mother of creation who became the queen of the dead. Every god, every betrayal, every secret, from the very first breath of the universe to the birth of an empire. Welcome to Splinters of Time.
But before we begin, there is something you should understand. This is not a story about a dead religion. Shinto is alive. Today, more than 80,000 shrines stand across Japan. Millions of people still bow before the same gods you are about to meet. And the oldest records of these gods come from two ancient chronicles, the Kojiki, completed in the year 712, and the Nihon Shoki, completed 8 years later. Sometimes these two books tell the same story in different ways. When they disagree, we will tell you. Because in Japan, the gods were never written in stone. They were written in water, always moving, always alive. Now, let us return to the beginning, before the water, before the light, before everything. In the beginning, there was no heaven, no earth, only a boundless, silent chaos. And then, in the highest plane of existence, a single presence appeared. Ame no Okuninushi, the master of the august center of heaven. He was not born, he simply became. No father, no mother, no form that human eyes could ever see. The Kojiki names him as the very first god, a consciousness standing alone at the center of everything before there was anything. And then, having appeared, he did something no other supreme god in world mythology would dare to do. He hid himself, and he was never seen again. But Ame no Okuninushi was not alone for long. Two more presences emerged beside him. Takamimusubi, the high generative force, and Kamimusubi, the divine generative force. Together with the first god, they formed a hidden trinity, 3 solitary beings, 3 engines of creation itself. They did not build the world with their hands. They were the reason the world could be built at all. And unlike the first god, these two would return, again and again, whispering behind the greatest events in heaven, choosing which gods would rise and which would fall. Then, from the young earth drifting below, something impossible happened. Life reached upward. Like a reed shoot piercing the surface of a marsh, a fourth god emerged, Umashiyashika Bihikoji, born from the first living thing that ever grew, and beside him a fifth, Ame no Tokotachi, the eternal standing of heaven. With him the sky itself became permanent. These 5 beings are known as the Kotoa Matsukami, the distinguished heavenly gods. All 5 appeared alone, all 5 hid their forms, and all 5 stepped back into silence. Their work was done, the stage was built. Now the age of the gods could truly begin. The 5 hidden gods had vanished, but creation did not stop. From the newly forming world, a new lineage began to rise, the Kami-Yonanayo, the 7 generations of the age of the gods. The first to appear was Kuni no Tokotachi, the eternal standing of the land. Where Ame no Tokotachi had made the heavens permanent, this god anchored the earth itself. And here, the 2 ancient chronicles part ways for the first time. The Kojiki places him sixth in the order of creation. But the Nihon Shoki names him as the very first god of all. Born from a reed sprout rising out of the primordial chaos. 2 books, 2 beginnings, one god standing at the center of both. After him came Toyokumono, the god of abundant clouds, formless, drifting, the last of the solitary ones. And then something changed. The gods stopped appearing alone. They began to appear in pairs, male and female, 2 by 2. Uhijini and Suhijini, the gods of mud and sand, the first matter you could touch. Tsunuguhi and Ikuguhi, the gods of the life force, the pulse that makes things grow. Otonoji and Otonobe, the gods of dwelling and form, and Omodaru and Ayakashikone, the gods of the completed face and the awakening of awe. Listen to what is happening here. Generation by generation, the universe is assembling itself. First mud, then life, then shape, then beauty, each couple one step closer to something the world had never seen before. A body, a face, a desire. And at the end of the 7th generation, they arrived. Izanagi, he who invites, and Izanami, she who invites. Brother and sister, husband and wife. The final perfection of everything the 6 generations before them had been building toward. They were young, they were curious, and they were standing at the edge of heaven, looking down at a world that was still nothing but a drifting ocean of oil, shapeless as a jellyfish. The elder gods gathered. They placed a weapon in their hands, a spear crusted with jewels, the Ame no Nuhoko, and they gave the young couple a single command. Go down and make something solid. What happened next would create a nation and destroy them both. Izanagi and Izanami stood upon the floating bridge of heaven. Below them, the world was an endless ocean of formless brine. Izanagi lowered the jeweled spear into the water, and he stirred. Slowly, the sound of the churning sea was the first sound the world had ever made. When he lifted the spear, drops of salt water fell from its tip, and where they fell, they hardened. They became an island. Onogoro, the self-forming island, the first solid ground in all of existence. The 2 gods descended upon it. They raised a great pillar reaching toward the sky, and they built a palace around it. Then Izanagi turned to Izanami and asked her a question no being had ever asked before. "How is your body formed?" she answered. "My body is complete, except for one part which does not grow together," Izanagi replied. "My body is complete, except for one part which grows in excess. What if I joined my excess to your emptiness? And together we give birth to lands." It was the first marriage proposal in the history of the world. They agreed on a sacred ritual. Each would walk around the great pillar in opposite directions, and when they met on the other side, they would greet one another as bride and groom. They circled the pillar, and when they met, Izanami spoke first. "What a beautiful young man," she said. Izanagi responded in kind. They were married, and their first child was born. But something was wrong. The child came into the world without bones, soft, malformed, unable to stand. They named him Hiruko, the leech child, and with sorrow they placed him in a boat of reeds and set him adrift upon the sea. Remember this abandoned child, because the ocean did not swallow him. Centuries later, the people of Japan would find him again, and they would give him a new name. But that story must wait. The grieving couple returned to heaven and asked the elder gods what had gone wrong. The answer came through divination. The ritual had been broken. The woman had spoken first. They returned to the island. They circled the pillar once more, and this time Izanagi spoke first. And now creation poured out of Izanami like a flood. She gave birth to the island of Awaji, then Shikoku, then Kyushu, then the great island of Honshu. 8 islands in all. The ancient name of Japan means exactly this, Oyashima, the land of 8 great islands. A nation was not conquered into existence. It was born from a mother. And Izanami was not finished. After the islands came the gods themselves, gods of the sea, ruled by Watatsumi, gods of the mountains, ruled by Oyamatsumi. Remember his name. His daughters will one day decide whether emperors live forever or die. Gods of wind, of trees, of rivers and mist and valleys, dozens of divine children, each one becoming a living piece of the world. The universe was almost complete. There was only one element left to be born, and it would cost the mother of creation her life. His name was Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, and from the moment of his birth, he was burning. Izanami delivered her final child in agony. The flames of his newborn body consumed her from within. The goddess who had given birth to an entire nation lay dying, and even in her final fevered moments, new gods spilled from her suffering. And then the mother of the world closed her eyes, the first death in the history of existence, and it was creation itself that died. Izanagi collapsed beside her body. He wept, and from his falling tears, a goddess was born, Nakisawame, the goddess of weeping. Even grief in this story becomes divine. But grief was not the only thing born that day. Izanagi rose, he drew his sword, and he looked at his newborn son, the child whose fire had murdered his wife. Oh, the blade came down, Kagutsuchi was cut into pieces, and from his blood splattered across the rocks, new gods burst into being, gods of thunder, gods of the mountain rain, and one god above all, Takemikazuchi, the god of the sword and of conquest, born from blood and vengeance. One day, this god will descend from heaven and bring an entire earthly kingdom to its knees. The fire god was dead. Izanami was gone. But Izanagi could not accept it. There was one place he could still find her, the land no living being was ever meant to enter, the land of the dead. Izanagi could not let her go. Somewhere beneath the world of the living there was another realm, Yomi, the land of gloom, the place where the dead reside. No god had ever entered it, no god had ever needed to. Death itself was only days old. Izanagi found the entrance, a dark passage descending into the earth, and he walked in. Through the blackness he called her name, and from the shadows of a sealed hall her voice answered. It was her, Izanami, his wife, his sister, the mother of the world, but her voice carried a terrible weight. "You are too late," she said. "I have already eaten the food of this land, and those who eat the food of Yomi belong to Yomi." Still, she offered him one hope. She would go and plead with the gods of the underworld for her release. She asked only one thing in return. "Do not look at me. Wait in the darkness, and do not look." Izanagi waited and waited. The silence of the dead pressed in around him, and his patience broke. He took the comb from his hair, snapped off its end tooth, and lit it as a torch. A small flame rose in the land of eternal night, the first light Yomi had ever seen. And in that light, he saw his wife. Izanami was rotting. Her flesh crawled with maggots, and upon her ruined body sat 8 gods of thunder, hatched from her corruption, growling in the dark. The most beautiful goddess in creation had become the most horrifying sight in existence. Izanagi screamed, and he ran. Behind him, Izanami's voice rose into a shriek of rage and shame. "You have humiliated me." She sent the hags of Yomi hunting after him, the Yomotsu Shikome. Izanagi hurled down his headdress, and it burst into wild grapes. The hag stopped to devour them. He threw his comb, and it sprouted into bamboo shoots. Still, they came. At last, Izanami sent the 8 thunder gods themselves, and an army of 1,500 warriors of the dead. At the border between the two worlds, Izanagi found a peach tree. He tore 3 peaches from its branches and hurled them into the darkness. And the armies of death broke and fled. Remember this. In Japan, even today, the peach is a weapon against evil. But the final pursuer was Izanami herself, the queen of the dead, rising from the darkness to reclaim her husband. Izanagi reached the mouth of the passage and seized a boulder so massive that it would take 1,000 men to move it. He dragged it across the entrance and sealed the land of the dead forever. They stood on opposite sides of the stone, husband and wife, life and death, and there they spoke their final words. Izanami's voice came through the rock, cold as the grave. "My beloved, if you do this, I will strangle 1,000 of your people every single day." And Izanagi answered, "My beloved, then every single day I will build 1,500 birthing huts." And so it was decided. Every day 1,000 die, and every day 1,500 are born. This is why death can never win. This is why life always grows. The woman who gave birth to the world became Yomotsu Okami, the great goddess of the dead. And Izanagi turned away from the stone, carrying something invisible upon his skin, the filth of the underworld. To be clean again, he would need to wash. And that simple act of washing would give birth to the 3 greatest gods Japan has ever known. Izanagi walked out of the darkness and into the light of the living world. But Yomi clung to him. The pollution of death covered his body like an invisible stain. So he traveled to a river mouth where fresh water met the sea. He removed his garments, and every single thing he cast off became a god. His staff, his sash, his robe, 12 gods born from the clothing of the Creator. Then he stepped into the water, and as he washed, gods poured from him with every movement, gods of the sea depths, gods of the currents, the great Watatsumi gods and the Sumiyoshi gods, guardians of sailors to this very day. This is the ritual the Japanese call misogi, purification by water. Walk past any Shinto shrine today, and you will see a stone basin where worshippers wash their hands before approaching the gods. Every one of them is repeating what Izanagi did at the dawn of time. And then came the final washing, the moment the entire story had been building toward. Izanagi bent down, and he washed his face. He washed his left eye, and light itself came into being. Amaterasu, the heaven-shining great August goddess, the sun. From the moment of her birth, she outshone every god that had come before her. Izanagi looked upon his daughter and made a decision that would shape the destiny of a nation. He removed his sacred necklace and placed it around her neck. The plane of high heaven, Takamagahara, would be hers to rule. Understand what this means. In almost every mythology on earth, the supreme deity of the sky is a father, a king, a god of thunder and command. But in Japan, the highest throne of heaven belongs to a woman. She is not all-powerful. She makes mistakes. She knows fear. And that is precisely why her people have loved her for more than 2,000 years. Today, her spirit is enshrined at Ise, the holiest ground in all of Japan, rebuilt from fresh timber every 20 years so that her dwelling is forever new. And her bloodline, so the chronicles say, never left the throne. The family that sits upon it today still traces its ancestry to her. Then Izanagi washed his right eye. and the night was born. Tsukuyomi, the moon-counting god, cold, silent, beautiful. He was given the realm of the night to rule beside his radiant sister. And here the chronicles fall strangely quiet. The Kojiki, having announced his birth, almost never speaks of him again. But the Nihon Shoki records one story, a story that split the sky in two. Amaterasu sent Tsukuyomi down to visit Ukimochi, the goddess of food. To welcome her divine guest, Ukimochi produced a feast. But she produced it from her own body, rice from her mouth, fish from the sea of her lips, game from the forests within her. Tsukuyomi watched, and he was disgusted. Food, drawn from the body of the host. To him it was defilement. He drew his sword and struck the goddess of food dead, and from her fallen body, a miracle. Rice seeds, millet, beans, silkworms. The corpse of one goddess became the agriculture of an entire civilization. But when Amaterasu learned what her brother had done, her fury was absolute. She swore never to look upon his face again. And this, the ancient text says, is why the sun and the moon never share the same sky. Day and night were not designed. They are the aftermath of a murder. One detail before we move on. The Kojiki tells this same killing differently, placing the sword in another god's hand, a god we are about to meet. And whether or not he killed the goddess of food, his crimes were about to plunge the entire universe into darkness. Izanagi washed his nose, and chaos was born. Susanoo, the impetuous male, god of storms and the raging sea. Where his sister was light and order, he was wind and fury. Where his brother was cold silence, he was a scream. Izanagi commanded him to rule the seas, but Susanoo refused to rule anything. He stood in the halls of heaven and wept. He howled. His weeping withered the green mountains. His tears drained the rivers dry. When his father demanded a reason, the storm god gave an answer no one expected. I want my mother. I want to go to the land where Izanami dwells. The god of storms was a grieving son. Izanagi's rage was terrible. For this defiance, Susanoo was banished. But before leaving forever, Susanoo made one request. Let me climb to heaven. Let me say farewell to my sister. And as he ascended, the mountains shook and every river roared. In her palace above, Amaterasu heard him coming, and the sun goddess reached for her bow. Amaterasu stood at the gates of heaven in full armor, her bow drawn, 10,000 arrows at her side. She did not believe her brother had come to say goodbye. She believed he had come to take her throne. Susanoo swore his heart was pure. And to prove it, he proposed an ancient ritual, an ukehi, a trial by birth. Each would take something the other owned, and from it bring forth children. The nature of those children would reveal the truth of his heart. Amaterasu took her brother's sword. She snapped it into 3 pieces, chewed them, and breathed out a mist. And from that mist came 3 goddesses, the Munakata sisters, goddesses of the sea roads, worshipped to this day at the great shrines of Munakata, guardians of the waters between Japan and the continent. Then Susanoo took the sacred jewels from his sister's hair. He chewed them, and breathed out 5 male gods. The eldest was Ame no Oshihomimi. Hold on to that name. His grandson will one day descend from heaven and found an empire. 5 sons, 3 daughters, but who had won? Even the 2 ancient chronicles cannot agree. The Kojiki rules one way, the Nihon Shoki the other. What both agree on is this: Susanoo declared himself the winner, and his victory celebration became a rampage. Drunk on triumph, Susanoo tore through the plain of high heaven. He smashed the ridges of his sister's sacred rice fields. He filled her irrigation channels. He defiled her palace of first fruits. And Amaterasu forgave him. Again and again. Her patience was the patience of the sun itself, until the day Susanoo committed an act so violent that even heaven could not endure it. He took a celestial horse, he flayed it, and he hurled the carcass through the roof of the sacred weaving hall, where the garments of the gods were woven. Inside, a young weaving maiden leapt back in terror. Her body struck the sharp end of her own loom, and she died. A daughter of heaven, dead on the floor of the holiest workshop in existence. Something in Amaterasu broke. The goddess of the sun said nothing. She walked to a cave in the side of a heavenly mountain. She stepped inside, and she pulled the stone door shut behind her. And every light in the universe went out. Eternal night fell across heaven and earth. The rice fields withered in the black. Evil spirits swarmed like summer flies, and their voices filled the darkness. The universe was dying, and so the gods gathered. 800 myriad kami assembled in the dry riverbed of heaven, facing a single impossible problem. How do you move the sun? The answer came from Omoikane, the god of wisdom, the mind that heaven turns to when all else fails. His plan was not a weapon, it was a performance. First, they gathered the long crying roosters of the eternal night and set them crowing, as if dawn had come. Then the divine smith Ishikoridome forged a mirror of perfect bronze, the Yata no Kagami. Tamanoya strung curved jewels onto a long strand. They uprooted a sacred sakaki tree and planted it before the cave, hanging the mirror and the jewels upon its branches. Ame no Koyane began to chant, and then the final piece of the plan stepped forward. A goddess named Ame no Uzume, the goddess of the dawn, and of laughter. She overturned a wooden tub before the cave. She climbed on top of it, and she began to dance. She stamped her feet like thunder. She danced wilder and wilder, loosening her garments, letting them fall, possessed by a divine ecstasy. And the 800 myriad gods watching her erupted. Their laughter shook the pillars of heaven itself. Inside the cave, Amaterasu heard it. Laughter. The universe was in eternal darkness. Every living thing was dying, and the gods were laughing. Curiosity cracked the stone door open. "Why," she asked, "is everyone rejoicing?" And Uzume answered without missing a step. "Because we have found a goddess greater than you." Through the crack, Amaterasu saw a radiant being staring back at her. Brilliant, blinding, magnificent. She did not recognize her own reflection in the bronze mirror. She leaned closer, and a hand seized hers. Tajikarao, the god of strength, hidden beside the door, hauled the sun goddess out into the open. And behind her, another god stretched a rope of twisted rice straw across the mouth of the cave and spoke the words, "You may go no further back than this." Light returned to the universe. The world was reborn. Walk up to any Shinto shrine today and look above the entrance. You will see a thick rope of twisted rice straw, the Shimenawa. Every single one is a descendant of that rope, an ancient promise renewed 80,000 times across Japan. The sun must never hide again. As for Susanoo, the gods shaved his beard, tore out his fingernails, fined him 1,000 tables of offerings, and cast him out of heaven forever. The storm, God fell to earth, disgraced, alone, and walking straight toward the greatest monster Japan has ever known. Susanoo fell from heaven and landed in the province of Izumo by the banks of the river Hai. The god of storms was now an exile, stripped of his rank, stripped of his glory, wandering a world he had never bothered to know. And then, floating down the river, he saw something strange, a single chopstick, which meant one thing. Someone was living upstream. He followed the water, and he found them. an old man and an old woman weeping beside a young girl. The old man was Ashinazuchi, his wife Tenazuchi, earthly gods, children of the mountain god Oyamatsumi himself, and between them sat their daughter, Kushinada-hime, the last one. "We had 8 daughters," the old man said, "and every year it comes, it devours one of them. This year it comes for her." Susanoo asked what it was, and the old man described a nightmare. A serpent with 8 heads and 8 tails, its body stretching across 8 valleys and 8 hills, moss and cypress trees growing upon its back, its belly forever bleeding, forever inflamed, and its eyes glowing red as winter cherries. The Yamata no Orochi. Susanoo looked at the weeping family, and the disgraced god saw something he had never seen in heaven, a chance to be worthy. He made an offer, "Give me your daughter's hand in marriage, and I will kill the thing that hunts her." The old couple agreed, and what Susanoo did next reveals the mind hiding inside the storm. He did not sharpen his sword. He did not build a fortress. He transformed Kushinada-hime into a comb and placed her in his hair, where no serpent could ever reach her. Then he gave his orders. Brew wine, not ordinary wine, sake refined 8 times over, the strongest ever made. Build a fence with 8 gates, and at every gate place a vat filled to the brim. Then they hid, and they waited. The earth began to tremble. 8 heads rose over the hills like a moving mountain range. The Orochi had come for its yearly tribute, but instead of a girl, it found the fragrance of divine wine. 8 heads dipped into 8 vats, and the monster drank itself into darkness. Susanoo rose from his hiding place. He drew his blade, and he fell upon the sleeping horror. He hacked the serpent into pieces, head by head, coil by coil, until the river high ran red and its waters turned to blood. But as his sword bit into the middle tail, something happened. The blade chipped, steel breaking against something harder than steel. Susanoo cut the tail open, and inside the flesh of the monster he found a sword. Perfect, gleaming, radiating power. He named it Ame no Murakumo, the sword of the gathering clouds of heaven. The world would come to know it by another name, Kusanagi. And here the storm god did something no one in heaven believed he was capable of. He looked at the greatest treasure he had ever held, and he gave it away. He sent the sword up to his sister, to Amaterasu, an apology, forged inside a monster. She accepted it, and that sword would one day return to earth in the hands of her grandson, becoming one of the 3 sacred treasures of the Japanese throne. Susanoo built a palace at Suga in the land of Izumo. He restored Kushinada-hime to her true form and made her his bride. And standing before his new home, watching the clouds rise in 8-fold banks above the land, the god of chaos composed something unexpected. A poem, the oldest poem in the history of Japan. The storm had finally found peace, and from his line would come a descendant who would inherit everything, not through war, but through kindness to a wounded rabbit. Generations passed in the land of Izumo, and from the line of Susanoo came a young god named Onamuji. The Kojiki calls him a descendant of the storm god, 6 generations removed. The Nihon Shoki simply calls him a son. On one thing the chronicles agree. He had 80 brothers, and all 80 of them despised him. The brothers set out one day for the land of Inaba to compete for the hand of a famous beauty, Princess Yagami-hime. Onamuji walked behind them all, carrying their bags like a servant. On the shore of Inaba, the 80 brothers passed a small, broken creature, a hare, skinned alive, its raw body trembling on the sand. The brothers looked at it, and they laughed. "Bathe in the salt sea," they told it, and let the wind dry you on a high ridge." The hare obeyed, and the salt turned its agony into torture. Then came Onamuji, last of all, bent under the weight of his brother's baggage. He stopped, and he listened. The hare had tried to cross the sea by tricking a family of crocodile sharks, lining them up as a bridge and mocking them at the final step. The last shark had torn its skin away as the price of its arrogance. Onamuji did not laugh. "Wash in the fresh water of the river mouth," he said gently. "Then gather the pollen of the cattail reeds, spread it on the ground, and roll upon it." The hare obeyed, and its body was made whole, white fur, soft as new snow. And then the creature spoke with a voice that was no longer the voice of an animal. It was a god. "Yagami-hime will refuse your brothers," the hare declared. "She will choose you." The prophecy of the white hare of Inaba came true, and 80 hearts turned to murder. The brothers lured Onamuji to the foot of a mountain in Hoki. "A great red boar lives on this peak," they said. "We will drive it down. You catch it." And from the summit, they sent down not a boar, but a boulder, heated in fire until it glowed red. Onamuji caught it, and it burned him to death, but his mother refused to accept it. She ascended to heaven and pleaded before Kamimusubi, the ancient generative force, one of the 5 hidden gods from the very beginning of time. And the primordial goddess answered. She sent down 2 healers, Kisagai-hime, the goddess of the ark shell, and Umugi-hime, the goddess of the clam. One ground her shell to powder, the other carried the water of life. They anointed his burned body, and Onamuji rose from the dead, more beautiful than before. The brothers tried again. They split a great tree, wedged it open, forced him inside, and released the wedge. The tree crushed him. Again his mother found him. Again he was restored. But now she understood. As long as he remained in this land, her son would die and die and die again. "Flee," she told him. "Go down. Go to the root land below the world. Go to the realm of Susanoo." Onamuji descended into Ne no Katasukuni, the firm root land, the realm where the old storm god now reigned. And at the door of Susanoo's palace, he met a goddess, Suseribime, the daughter of the storm. Their eyes met, and by the time the sun set, they were already married in secret. Suseribime walked into her father's hall and announced that a most handsome god had arrived. Susanoo looked at the young stranger, and the old chaos flickered in his eyes. That night Susanoo offered his guest a bedchamber. It was a chamber of snakes, but Suseribime had slipped her husband a scarf. "Wave it 3 times, she whispered. He did, and the serpent slept. The next night, a chamber of centipedes and wasps, another scarf, another quiet morning. Then Susanoo fired an arrow into the heart of a vast grassland and sent Onamuji to fetch it. And as the young god searched, the storm god set the field on fire. A ring of flame closing in from every horizon. Death everywhere. Then the ground itself spoke. A mouse stood before him. "The inside is hollow," the mouse said. "The outside is narrow." Onamuji understood. He stamped the earth and fell through into a hidden hollow, and the firestorm roared over him. The mouse returned, carrying the lost arrow in its teeth. Even the smallest creature of the earth had chosen his side. Finally, one night, while picking the insects from the old god's hair as a servant would, Onamuji made his move. He tied Susanoo's long hair to the rafters of the hall, seized the god's own great sword, his bow of life, and his heavenly harp, took Suseribime upon his back, and ran. The harp brushed a tree as they fled. It rang out across the underworld like a struck mountain. Susanoo woke. He tore the rafters from his own palace, and he chased them to the flat slope where the dead world meets the living. And there, at the boundary, the god of storms stopped, and he smiled. "Take my sword," he roared into the distance. "Take my bow. Take my daughter. Chase your 80 brothers down every slope in the land, and rule. From this day, your name is Okuninushi, the master of the great land." It was not a curse, it was a blessing, the last gift of the storm. Okuninushi did exactly as the old god commanded. With the sword of Susanoo, he broke the power of his 80 brothers and became the ruler of Izumo. And then he began to build. One day, from across the waves, something small came riding toward the shore. A tiny god sailing in a boat made from a bean pod, dressed in the skin of a wren. None of the gods knew his name. Then Quebiko spoke. "The Scarecrow God, the God who cannot walk, but knows everything under heaven." "That," said the Scarecrow, "is Sukunabikona, son of Kamimusubi herself." The tiny god became Okuninushi's partner. Together they crossed the land, teaching medicine, agriculture, and the arts of healing. The giant and the dwarf, building a civilization side by side. And then, one day, without a word of farewell, Sukunabikona stepped onto a stalk of millet, was flung into the air, and crossed over to the eternal land, never to return. Okuninushi stood alone, despairing. "Who will help me finish this country?" And light came moving across the sea, a radiant presence. "Worship me on the green fence of mountains in the east," it said, "and I will build this land with you." It was Omononushi, the great spirit of Mount Miwa, worshipped there to this very day at what may be the oldest shrine in all of Japan. The kingdom was complete. Okuninushi ruled the visible world, with sons at his side, wise Kotoshironushi, mighty Takeminakata. But far above, in the plain of high heaven, the sun goddess was watching, and Amaterasu had decided that the earth below belonged to her family. In the plain of high heaven, Amaterasu issued a decree. The land of the reed plains below was overflowing with unruly spirits. It must be pacified, and it must be ruled by her own bloodline. Her son, Eime no Oshihomimi, was commanded to descend. He stood on the floating bridge, looked down at the world seething below, and refused to go. So heaven sent a messenger instead. Ame no Hohi, another of her sons. He descended to the court of Okuninushi. And then something strange happened. Silence. 3 years passed. No word came back. The messenger of heaven had looked at the kingdom of the earth god and joined it. A second envoy was chosen, Ame no Wakahiko, armed with a heavenly bow. He descended. He married Okuninushi's own daughter. And for 8 years he sent no word, dreaming of taking the land for himself. Heaven sent a pheasant to question him. He shot it, and the arrow, stained with blood, flew upward, through the clouds, and landed at the feet of the gods themselves. Takamimusubi, the ancient hidden one, picked up the arrow and hurled it back down with a curse. It found Ame no Wakahiko sleeping, and it killed him. 2 messengers, 2 betrayals. Ask yourself what kind of kingdom this was, that even the envoys of heaven chose it over paradise. Heaven's patience was spent. This time, they did not send a diplomat. They sent Takemikazuchi, the thunder god of the sword. Born from the blood of the fire, god Kagutsuchi, on the day Izanagi took his vengeance at the dawn of time. With him came Futsunushi, god of the blade's edge. They descended not to a palace, but to a beach, the shore of Inasa, in Izumo. And there Takemikazuchi drew his great sword and drove it upside down into the crest of a wave. Then he sat, cross-legged, upon its point, and from that impossible throne he delivered heaven's ultimatum. This land belongs to the descendants of the sun goddess. Surrender it. Okuninushi, the master of the great land, did not answer. He deferred to his son, and wise Kotoshironushi gave his counsel in a single breath. Give it to them. Then he tilted his boat over himself and vanished into the sea. But the second son, mighty Takeminakata, arrived carrying a boulder that 1,000 men could not lift. He challenged the thunder god to a contest of strength. They seized each other's arms, and the ancient chronicles describe what happened next as the first sumo match in history. Takemikazuchi's arm turned to a pillar of ice, then to a sword blade. Then he crushed the challenger's arm like a young reed and hurled him across the land. Takeminakata fled to the Sea of Suwa in the mountains and surrendered there, vowing never to leave. To this day, at Lake Suwa, the shrines of his exile still stand. And so Okuninushi, the survivor of 2 deaths, the tamer of the underworld, the builder of the first civilization, agreed to give away everything. But he named a price. "Build me a dwelling," he said, "a palace with pillars reaching down to the bedrock and crossbeams reaching up to the plane of high heaven itself, and I will retire into the unseen world and rule the realm of spirits." Heaven agreed. The visible world for the sun's bloodline, the invisible world for the master of the land. And the shrine was built, Izumo Taisha. It stands today as one of the holiest places in Japan, but listen to what the old records claimed. They said that in ancient times this shrine towered 48 meters into the sky. A wooden colossus, taller than a 10-story building, raised more than 1,000 years ago. For centuries, historians dismissed it. A legend, an exaggeration, impossible. Then, in the year 2000, workers digging in the shrine courtyard struck something in the earth. 3 colossal cedar trunks, bound together into a single titanic pillar, exactly as the old diagrams had described. The impossible shrine was real. The records were not exaggerating. Which leaves us with a question. If the chronicles told the truth about this, what else were they telling the truth about? The earth was ready, and heaven made its final choice. Not Eimei no Oshihomimi, who had refused twice, but his newborn son, Ninigi, grandson of Amaterasu herself. The sun goddess placed 3 objects into his hands: the mirror that had drawn her from the cave, the jewels that had hung on the sacred tree, and the sword Kusanagi, cut from the tail of the 8-headed serpent. "Look upon this mirror," she commanded, "as if you were looking upon me. These are the 3 sacred treasures of Japan, and they did not stay in the story. They stepped out of it. The mirror is said to rest at Ise, the sword at Atsuta Shrine in Nagoya, the jewel within the imperial palace in Tokyo. For over 1,000 years of recorded history, they have been passed from emperor to emperor, always wrapped, always hidden. No photograph of them exists. No commoner has ever looked upon them. Even the emperor himself, they say, receives them sight unseen. 3 objects from the age of the gods, still changing hands in the 21st century. Ninigi descended through the 8 layers of clouds toward the peak of Takachiho. At the crossroads of heaven and earth stood a towering figure with a glowing gaze. Sarutahiko, the god of the crossroads, come to guide him down. And it was fearless Ame no Uzume, the dancer who had saved the sun, who stepped forward to meet him. The heavenly grandson touched the earth. The age of the gods was ending. The age of emperors was about to begin. On earth, Ninigi met a maiden of impossible beauty, Konohana Sakuya Hime, the princess of the blossoming trees, goddess of Mount Fuji itself. He asked for her hand, and her father, the mountain god Oyamatsumi, rejoiced. He sent Ninigi not 1 daughter, but 2, the Blossom Princess, and her elder sister Iwanaga Hime, the princess of the eternal rock. Ninigi looked at the elder sister. She was not beautiful, and he sent her back. It was the greatest mistake in the history of the imperial line. The mountain god's voice shook with sorrow. "I sent you both for a reason," he said. "With the rock princess, your life would have been eternal as stone. With the blossom princess, your life will flower and fall. Because you refuse the rock, the lives of the heavenly sovereigns will be brief as the mountain blossoms." And so it was. The gods of Japan chose beauty over eternity, and from that day forward, even the descendants of the sun must die. Ninigi and the Blossom Princess had sons, and two of them carried gifts as different as the sea and the mountains. Hoderi, the elder, Umisachi, the luck of the sea, a fisherman whose hook never failed, and Huri, the younger, Yamasachi, the luck of the mountains, a hunter whose arrow never missed. One day, the younger brother made a request. "Let us trade our gifts just once. Your hook for my bow." The elder brother refused 3 times, then finally, reluctantly, agreed. And it went exactly as you would expect. The hunter caught no fish. And worse, he lost the hook. Huri broke his own sword into 500 new hooks in repayment. His brother refused them all. "I want my hook," he said, "the one and only." And the young god sat weeping by the shore, facing an impossible task. Somewhere at the bottom of the ocean, in all its endless dark, one small piece of metal. Then an old god of the tides appeared beside him. He wove a small boat of tightly bound bamboo, and he pointed the way down. To the palace of Watatsumi, the god of the sea. At the gates of the sea palace, above a well, stood a cassia tree. Huri climbed into its branches and waited, and a servant of the princess came to draw water. She saw a light in the well, the reflection of a beautiful stranger in the tree above. Toyotama Haim, the daughter of the sea god, came to see for herself. Their eyes met, and the sea decided the rest. Watatsumi welcomed the grandson of heaven, spread sealskin carpets 8 layers deep, and gave him his daughter's hand. 3 years passed in the palace beneath the waves, until one night Huri sighed. He had remembered the hook. The sea god summoned every fish in the ocean, and there, lodged in the throat of a red snapper, was the one and only hook. But Watatsumi did not simply return it. He gave his son-in-law 2 jewels, one to raise the tide, one to lower it, and a curse to speak over the hook itself. When Huri returned to land and faced his brother, the sea itself fought for him. The elder brother's fields withered, and when he attacked, the tide jewel rose the ocean around him until he begged for his life. Hoderi surrendered and swore that his descendants would serve his brother's line forever. Then came the day Toyotama Haim arrived on the shore, carrying the child of heaven and sea within her. She built a birthing hut roofed with cormorant feathers, and she gave her husband one command, the same command that had once been spoken in the land of the dead. "Do not look at me. While I give birth, I must return to my true form. Do not look." And like his ancestor before him, he looked. Inside the hut, coiling in labor, was an immense sea creature, a dragon of the deep, his wife's true form. Toyotama Haim felt his eyes upon her, and her shame was absolute. She placed the newborn child upon the shore, turned back to the sea, and closed the path between the worlds behind her, forever. The abandoned child was named Ugaya Fukiya Ezu, raised not by his mother, but by her younger sister, Tamayori Hime, sent from the sea to care for him. And when he came of age, he married the very aunt who had raised him. The bloodlines of Japan were now complete. Heaven through Ninigi, the mountains through the Blossom Princess, and the sea, twice over, through the daughters of Watatsumi. From this union came 4 sons, and the youngest was called Iwarebiko. History remembers him by another name, Jimmu, the first emperor of Japan. The chronicles tell of his great migration eastward, from Kyushu toward the rising sun, guided through the mountains by a three-legged crow sent from heaven. Yatagarasu, a bird you can still see today on the crest of Japan's national football team. After years of war, Iwarebiko stood in the land of Yamato and ascended the throne. The chronicles date it precisely, the year 660 before the Common Era. And here is where this story leaves every other mythology on Earth behind. The line of Jimmu did not end. It did not fall to revolution. It did not vanish into legend. The emperor who sits on the Chrysanthemum Throne today, Naruhito, is counted as the 126th sovereign of that same unbroken line, the oldest continuous monarchy on the planet, which means that officially, by the founding records of the Japanese state, the man who occupies the throne of Japan right now is a descendant of the sun. The age of the gods was over, but the gods had not left. They had simply become Japan. Do you remember the very first child, the boneless one, set adrift in a boat of reeds at the dawn of creation while heaven looked away? The chronicles never speak of him again, but the people of Japan do. Centuries later, on the shores of the land his parents created, a tradition arose. The fishermen said the child had survived, that the sea had carried him, healed him, raised him as its own, and that he had returned to his mother's islands as a smiling god of fortune, with a fishing rod in one hand and a great sea bream under his arm. They call him Ebisu, the laughing god, god of fishermen, of merchants, of honest luck. At Nishinomiya Shrine, they hold that Ebisu and Hiruko are one and the same, the first child of creation, the abandoned one, who came home. Of all the gods of Japan, he is among the most beloved. And he was never in the chronicles at all, because the pantheon of Japan was never finished. The people kept building it. Walk through Japan today, and the god you will meet most often was barely mentioned in the ancient records. Inari, the deity of rice, of prosperity, of foxes. 1/3 of all the shrines in Japan, tens of thousands of them, belong to Inari. You have seen them, whether you know it or not. Endless tunnels of vermilion gates winding up the mountainsides of Kyoto. Each gate, a gift from someone whose prayer was answered. Then there is Hachiman, the god of the bow and of war, guardian of the samurai, worshipped at tens of thousands of shrines. The warriors who shaped Japan for 7 centuries marched under his name. And then there is the strangest story of all, because one of Japan's mightiest gods was born human. His name was Sugawara no Michizane, a brilliant scholar of the 9th century, a poet, a minister, framed by his rivals at court, exiled in disgrace, dead in a distant province with his name in ruins. And then the capital began to suffer. Lightning struck the imperial palace again and again. Plague followed. The sons of his enemies died young. The court was seized by a single terrified conviction. It was him. His furious spirit returned as thunder. So they did the only thing they could think of. They cleared his name. They restored his rank, and they made him a god. Tenjin, the deity of scholarship and learning. Today, 1,000 years later, millions of Japanese students visit his shrines before their entrance exams, praying to a man whose anger once had to be enshrined into peace. In Japan, the line between human and God is not a wall, it is a door. Some gods entered the pantheon through neither chronicle nor court, but through pure elemental terror. Stand before the great Kaminarimon Gate in Tokyo, and 2 monstrous figures stare down at you. Raijin, the thunder god, ringed by his circle of drums, hammering the storm into existence. And Fujin, the wind god, carrying the winds of the world in a great bag slung across his shoulders, demonic faces, wild grins. When the Mongol fleets of Kublai Khan came to conquer Japan twice and were twice annihilated by typhoons, the people gave that salvation a name, Kamikaze, the divine wind. And beneath the waves, the Japanese honored Ryujin, the dragon king of the sea, keeper of the tide jewels, remembering the sea god of the old stories in a new dragon form. Storm, wind, and ocean, the three powers no island nation can ever stop worshipping. And in one final act of divine hospitality, Japan did something almost no other nation has ever done. It welcomed foreign gods into its own heaven. The Shichifukujin, the 7 gods of good fortune sailing together on their treasure ship. Only one of them, Ibisu, the leech child come home, is native to Japan. Daikokuten and Benzaiten and Bishamonten arrived from India, born of Hindu deities, carried across a continent by Buddhism. Hotei, the laughing monk with the cloth sack, came from China. Gods of India, gods of China, and a god of Japan, sharing one ship, bringing luck to the same shores. Every new year, millions of Japanese welcome them still. This is the final secret of the kami. The pantheon of Japan has no gates. It has never once, in 2,000 years, stopped growing. The Japanese have a phrase, Yaoyorozu no kami, the 8 million gods. It was never meant to be a census. It means the gods cannot be counted. That divinity in Japan is not a throne in the sky. It is a presence in everything. In the mountain, in the waterfall, in the ancient tree wrapped with a rope of rice straw. Every 20 years at Ise, the holiest shrine in the nation is torn down and rebuilt. Identical. Fresh timber. New thatch. It has been done for well over 1,000 years. Ask yourself why. Because in Japan, the divine is not preserved like a relic. It is renewed, like the sun, rising again each morning from the darkness of the cave. Somewhere in Tokyo, behind palace walls, a jewel from the age of the gods rests in its wrappings, never photographed, never displayed. Somewhere in Nagoya, a sword pulled from the tail of a serpent waits in the dark of its shrine. Somewhere in Ise, a mirror that once held the reflection of the sun herself. And on the Chrysanthemum Throne sits the 126th descendant of Amaterasu. The stories you have just heard are not ruins. They are foundations. The gods of Japan never died, because Japan never stopped believing. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it. Like and subscribe to Splinters of Time. And until next time, the past is never as far away as we think.